Naeem is a career consultant at Cardiff Metropolitan University and provides career support to their international students. He's worked for their career service for over 5 years and has over 20 years' experience of working as a recruitment consultant. Naeem, thank you so much for joining today.
Matthew, thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast.
You're welcome, Naeem. Thank you so much for giving us the time. So today we're going to be talking about crafting the perfect CV, tailoring their international application for success. And it's one of the struggle with international students, especially when they come into the UK, because the formatting that the UK industry recognizes could be quite different from the formatting that the international students are aware of from their home country. So, from your wealth of experience, what are the key components of a well crafted CV that can make international students, make their case strong or, make a strong impression on employers?
To answer your question with regard to the main components and the main sections that our international students really need to think about, in first instance, their name. Now, many of our international students have quite long names. They have 3, maybe 4 names. What we're looking for here is just their first name and surname. That's it. So the first name and their family name. We often don't need an address. Many of our students think that they need to put an address simply because it's the way we do things. If you think about it, how technology has moved on, letters aren't sent to addresses now. Everything is done through email and electronic correspondence. So I personally think you don't need to put an address as long as you have a location. All right. You would need obviously a mobile number and an email address. And if you are looking for an internship or a graduate job, then definitely a hyperlink to your LinkedIn profile as well. If you're looking for a part-time job, there's no requirement to put your LinkedIn profile. The next section is probably one of the most important sections. That's your personal profile. That's your introduction to an employer. So this is your opportunity to tell an employer within a very short space of time 3 things: who you are, what relevant skills and experience you have, and what you're ideally looking for. Now, it's all about creating impact. Your CV needs to do that very, very quickly. Employers spend on average up to about 10 seconds looking at your CV. It's not very long at all. So when I ask this question to my students, they often say, oh, an employer will look at your CV for 2 minutes and 5 minutes. Some people think that employers will look at their CV for 10 minutes. It's not the case. And I often then tell them, think when you are scrolling on social media, you're scrolling, you're looking, and what makes you stop? What makes you stop on a particular post, maybe on LinkedIn or on Instagram, for you to kind of look at that video or read that post? And I then remind them that employers do exactly the same as well. So that profile is that introduction, and that needs to be hard hitting. It needs to create impact. So it's like I said, it's who you are. So the international student need to tell the employers a little bit more about maybe what they're studying and maybe some attributes regarding their personality. And you've got to have a purpose. What are you looking for? Are you looking for an internship, a graduate job, a part-time job? So that makes a difference. And that message needs to be very, very clear. So that's the first thing that you would have towards the top of your CV. And then the rest of the sections would follow. So you could potentially have a skills section, which all depends on obviously what type of CV that you're creating. So you can have then an employment history section where you obviously highlight all the different opportunities that you've had. So it's all about the different employers, the different duties and responsibilities and the experiences that you've had, the positions that you've held, and the dates as well. And then your qualifications, your education and qualifications. What are you studying now? What have you studied in the past? So this is all in chronological order, most recent first as well. There's opportunities to maybe include other sections as well. So if there's any key achievements that you've undertaken, then I think it's important to include those. Your IT skills as well, especially Microsoft Office or Excel, Word, PowerPoint, but any other IT skills such as your digital marketing skills. Canva, for example, is asked for by many employers as well, and any other volunteering or work experience opportunities that you've had, make sure that those are listed. But just to really round it off, it's not just a case of listing things. It's all about adding value. It's all about creating impact. So it's not saying, I've undertaken a particular role. An employer wants to see what you did in that role. What difference did you make? So give an example. And those are things that are really, really important within the CV. And one final thing that many international students seem to forget is interests, hobbies and interests as well. So if you've got maybe an interest such as like reading or cooking or walking the dog, I don't think really that's going to be valid, or it's not going to be something that you'd want to put on your CV. However, if you're passionate about something, or if there's something that you've done for a very long time, so if you've raised money for charity, or if you've played sports for many, many years, if you have a passion to help and support those in need, those are things that employers want to know and hear about. So if those are listed on your CV, you are then going to be asked about those particular areas within the interview as well. So don't forget about your hobbies and interests, but make them interesting and back them up as well.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Naheem. I believe those were very comprehensive components you have mentioned there. And these are some of the things that international students pay consultants for to get those understanding. Because I have seen CVs where, I mean, like you mentioned, the UK only just need your first name and your last name on your CV. And it's true. But I was surprised you mentioned that first, but it's actually true because some international students have four names as their official name, and UK employers don't need that much of names. They just want to be convenient to call you your preferred name, and that's why sometimes when you fill a form in the UK, they ask you what is your preferred name.
Yes.
Uh, but I think maybe that is out of respect, but which is actually a good practice. So now with the 10 seconds rule for checking CV, from what you've said, does that mean that now it's like an elevator pitch? So it's assumed that in an elevator pitch, you should be able to sell your business idea within 10 to 15 seconds to a potential investor who will then prompt them, which will then prompt them to ask you for a meeting. So with this 10-second rule that employers or recruiters check the CV, is it that they just skim through the CV, and if something catches their interest, then they now go deeper into it to understand the candidate history?
That's right. Yeah. So very similar to what I mentioned earlier. So I always try to ensure that the students understand what an employer will be thinking. And I always say to my students, write your CV not from your point of view, but from the employer's point of view. So when they themselves are scrolling and looking and searching on social media and they stop at something, what makes them stop? And then I will, I will say to them, the employer does exactly the same. And what our international students aren't doing at the moment, and we are obviously teaching our students to do, is to tailor their applications. So what that basically means is the employer, when they look or scan the CV, they obviously are looking to recruit an individual with certain skills, with certain experience. All right. An employer will look and scan a CV very quickly. And if those keywords, those skills, those experience are not in evidence within on that first page, and your CV is not creating that impact, your CV will be deleted. So the secret here is to look at the job advert, look at the job description, look at the person's specification. And what you're doing is you are tailoring, taking that information and putting that information, not word for word, but you're adapting your CV to ensure that when the employer looks at your CV, they are going to be impressed. That's the secret. And this is something that our students aren't doing, unfortunately. So this takes time. And when we start talking to our students about tailoring and changing and adapting their CV for each job, this is not just a one-off. This is for each job. They come back to me the week after and say, Naeem, you're not going to believe this. I have changed my CV and I have now been invited to 3 or 4 interviews. It's as simple as that. It takes a little bit of time. There is a technique, but it makes sense. And that's going back to the fact that the employer sit in their seat. Think of what an employer would be looking for. That's what's going to make the big difference here as well. And when you have that in your mind, you will totally change and adapt your CV, and that's what you'll do.
Thank you so much for that, Naheem. I mean, the next question I wanted to ask you touched it already, which is around tailoring. What is the importance? How important it is for international students to tailor their CV to a specific role? Because what we see is that not just international students alone, job seekers tend to use one type of CV to apply for all kinds of jobs. So, how important is it for job seekers to tailor their CV to a specific job application, and what are the benefits they get in tailoring their CV to one specific application?
Yeah. First of all, I've got to agree with you. This is not something that just our international students tend to do. It is a common problem with our home students as well. So it's something that that again we need to educate all our students, not just international students. So the tailoring aspect, it requires some investment and it requires a little bit of research. So what you're basically doing is all students have a CV, and it's good to have a very standard formatted CV, full stop. Then when you actually see a job, so say for example, you would like to work for a, you know, a hospitality, or you want to work in a hotel, or you want to work in a restaurant, for example. So that particular role requires certain skills. So to work in that environment, you will need excellent customer service. You will need excellent communication skills. You will need to demonstrate that you are an excellent team player. Okay, those are the 3 things mainly that those kind of jobs are looking for. And when you see a job within hospitality or within retail, it's very evident and very clear that those are the skills. You've seen this job and you just think, oh, I really like that. I can do that. And you send your CV. You're not going to be invited for an interview. However, if you have identified that you have the skills that they are looking for, you need to promote those on your CV and on that first page. Don't hide those skills or don't hide those words on the second page. Some employers will not even get to the second page. So what you need to be doing is to evidence and not simply say skills, customer service, teamwork, communication. No, we're not talking about listing skills. What we're doing here is we are talking about identifying those skills and providing an example. So if you have relevant customer service skills, but maybe in another industry or another sector, that then is called transferable skills. You can transfer those customer service skills that you've already got into this new industry. And companies are fine with that. Employers are great with that. What they need to be seeing is that you have those skills. And if you're not highlighting those skills, then, like I said to you before, your CV will be deleted or just pushed to one side. So that's the most important thing, that when you are looking at job adverts, then you need to look at the skills and promote those skills. Ideally, if you have those skills, great. And if you don't have those skills, you need to do something about it. So what you can try and do is maybe gain some experience, maybe do some volunteering, or maybe join a club or a society. Those doing some voluntary work or unpaid work will give you those skills. You'll be able to put those on your CV, which will then take you to the next step as well. This is another thing that our again, international students think, is that they can just come to the UK and walk into a graduate job. It doesn't work like that. There are so many different things that our students need to be thinking of as well. So probably one of the most important thing is that they need to get some UK experience. And that could be voluntary, that can be unpaid work, that could be a part-time job. So many of our students find part-time work very quickly, certainly those that engage with the career service at Cardiff Met, simply because they know what to do with their CV and they know how to promote themselves at interview as well.
Thank you for that, Naeem. From one of the things you've said, brought me to another question I want to ask around CV, because right now we are trying to rip off CVs and understand how we can build it ourselves. So there's a controversial discussion in the industry as to how many pages should a CV be. Now, it's a bit confusing and vague because people who have 13 years of experience might not want to limit themselves to a two-page CV.
Yeah,
Now, I've done my research. I don't know if there's no research that says your CV should be 2 pages.
that's right.
So I'm not 100% sure, and a lot of international students are not 100% sure as to how many pages should your CV be. So, from your experience in the industry, how many pages should a CV be?
Okay, so this is quite a difficult question to answer, simply because if you're comparing an international student with no experience and then an international student with 15 years experience, and you're saying to both of them no more than 2 pages, how does that work? So I personally think there is no one best way of of compiling a CV. This all depends on obviously the individual, and it depends on what the CV is being used for. So say, for example, that international student who's got 15 years experience, probably in a senior role, they've come to the UK and they are now looking for a part-time job while they're a student. Do you think it's going to be a good idea for them to really include all that information? I would say no. So what they need to be thinking of then is diluting that CV, taking a lot of the things of their CV and their experiences out, and then trying to. So it's again changing, adapting, tailoring that CV for the job that they're applying for. So one of, I'll give you an example. One of my MBA students, her CV was probably about 5 pages long, and she was in her early 20s. She's just had a fantastic opportunity to gain some experiences in India. She'd had a number of internship opportunities. She'd worked part time. She'd had a full time job as well. She'd worked voluntarily. So a very active MBA student of mine. Her CV was 6 pages, and she was applying for part time jobs. She wasn't getting anywhere at all. So, and I was really surprised. I was thinking, why is she not getting? It's only when we had the discussion about CVs, and then when we actually sat down and talked and reviewed her CV, that's when we discovered that that was the problem. The moment that that problem was identified, within a couple of days, she came back to me, had diluted her CV. And what I mean by diluted is that rather than, so there were a number of jobs and opportunities that weren't relevant, she took them out. There were a number of jobs, so she had her own business as well. So she was calling herself an owner, a manager, a director. These job titles are quite overpowering as well. So again, we changed those titles, and if it wasn't relevant, we took them out. We eventually got the CV down to 2 pages. Within 2 weeks, she had 2 part-time jobs. And I'm not just saying going for these are not interviews, these are jobs. This is how quick this can happen as well. So going back to your question, how long should a CV be? I'm finding it quite difficult to say 2 pages. In the past, I've actually said, Matthew, no more than 2 pages. All right. However, like I said, if that individual, that more experienced international student who's got 15 years experience, it all depends on the job. So if they're applying for a graduate job or they're applying for a senior job, those jobs have got to stay in there. So it just means that if it does go on to 3 pages, that's fine. But the secret is this. It's all about creating impact on that first page. That's what you're trying to do. That's where you're setting the scene. That's where you're telling your story. And that's what, again, I need to reinforce to our students as well. A CV is a little bit like a story. Okay. And if that story is not is not well demonstrated, then again, the CV is not going to be picked out. So it's all about creating that impactfulness on that first page. And then once you've got their interest, even if it's 5 pages long, you've got them. Does that make sense? Right. Yeah. I'm not a fan of one-page CVs. I read often from other careers consultants or people within the careers field. You're no more than 1 page, and I think, really, no. I've I've not given that advice to my students. So the general advice I give to my students is ensure that the first page is the page that you are able to really sell and promote yourself, which makes the employer to read on. And if you are able to keep it to 2 pages, keep it to two. If it goes on to three, it's not the end of the world. I would say no more than three, to be honest.
That is quite very interesting because it's a common question that international students most especially ask because you see some international students have tons of pages. And with the story you mentioned, which is one of your student who's an MBA student, having a 5 page CV for a part-time role and having to include that you are a business owner could be very intimidating
Yes.
because employers want to think long term. So when they are thinking about the salary and the job level that they are advertising, and then you are a successful business owner, then they begin to now think. can we actually accommodate this person? Can we satisfy the need of this person?
Right.
Can this person be loyal to what we're doing? But then it kind of makes sense. And I'm so happy that you are able to come in to help your students, and she was able to secure jobs, not just a job, but
Two,
jobs.
two.
She got two offers.
So yes,
Interesting.
she had two part-time jobs, and one was 10 hours a week, and one was 8 hours a week.
Great. Thank you for that, Naheem. So, Naheem, from your experience in the industry, are there any common mistakes that international students make when writing their CV? And you can just mention probably a few of the mistakes. And then can you also tell us how they can avoid these mistakes?
Yeah.
So, are there any common mistakes that international students make when they're writing their CV? And how can they avoid them?
Okay. So the first mistake that we see from our international students is a picture, a photograph. So in the UK, we generally do not put pictures on our CVs. Yes, there are cases, certainly when there are creative CVs. So if you're applying for a job, say within marketing, within, say, the fashion industry, um, there are there are CVs that those particular employers like to see a picture, and that's absolutely fine. And it is quite ironic, Matthew, that your LinkedIn profile. There's a picture of me, of you, on our LinkedIn profile, and that is seen by millions, if not billions, around the world. However, it's just the way that we do things in the UK. However, when I see our students predominantly from Nigeria, from India, from Pakistan, from Bangladesh, from the Arab countries, these are countries where they've had a picture. They don't know anything different as well. So that's the first thing that we'll say to them. Please take the picture off. Okay. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we've talked about the name already. So rather than having, the 4 names or the 5 names. And the other thing our students do is they often put their surname first. Have you noticed that as well? So it's important to have your first name and then your surname. Date of birth. So this is something that all students, not just international students, but all students put on their CV. And again, in the countries that our international students come from, it must be some sort of requirement that they have their date of birth. Whereas here, obviously, because of discrimination, that's something that we don't push or promote. So we tell them to take it off. And then they question us and they say, why? Doesn't the employer want to know how old we are? And we say, no, not at all. This is all about creating that very important impact. The moment you start giving personal information, the employer is starting to think about you, about your background, about your experience, and you don't want to do that. You're trying to focus the employer on your skills and the experience and your worth. That's what we're trying to do with your CV. Your nationality. Why do you need to put your nationality on a CV? I'm Pakistani, I'm Indian, I'm Nigerian, I'm Moroccan. These are things that should not be included on your CV as well. Marital status or information about dependents as well. I'm single, I'm married, I've got 2 kids, I've got 4 kids, things like that. I've seen confidential information on CVs. I've seen national insurance number. I've seen passport numbers. I've seen mothers' names and fathers' names on CVs. No. All we need on a CV is your name, the location, not the address of where you live, the location, your email address, your mobile number, and if you are applying for a senior job or an experienced job or a graduate job, then a hyperlink to your LinkedIn profile. That's it.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive response, Naheem. Um, I know that some people used to have their pictures on their CV, and it boils down. I was an ex-international student, and where I come from, we put our date of birth on our CV.
Yep.
But when I got into the UK, I realized that that was not part of the niche. on how they create their CV here in the UK. And I think it kind of makes sense because of discrimination, just to create that inclusive environment and not to create a prejudice
Yeah.
as an employer when you're reading a CV. So it's just like you said, shifting that attention from your personal human being to your personal life to your professional self by documenting your experience and why they should take you as a potential employee. So that resonates very well. And I'm sure a lot of international students would take that and run away with that and change their CV. Now, with the CV, while we're still tearing apart the CV
Yes.
components, um, our international, how can international students showcase their transferable skills and demonstrate their value to potential employers in their application material?
Okay. So many of our international students, when they arrive in the UK, they do have experience. They've either worked significantly, or maybe they've had internships, maybe they've had part-time jobs in their home countries. And if they haven't, then uh, it's really important then to focus on what they've done during their school or during their university. So if they're a master's student, hopefully um, they would have been successful with the degree. So what did they do during that time as well? So first of all, it all depends on the actual individual. All right. And what stage they are at. And it's really important to highlight those skills, those transferable skills, as you said as well. And, and those individuals who've worked, they find it relatively easy to promote those skills. So you don't necessarily need to have a skills section. All right. What you can do is to prove your worth and promote those skills within the duties and responsibilities of the jobs or the roles that you've previously undertaken. So within your time at XYZ Limited, it's not just about the duties and responsibilities that you held. It's all about the difference that you've made and the skills that you've developed and learned. That is a great way to promote your skills, certainly for those individuals who have many years of experience. For those individuals who have very little or no experience, it's really important then for them to highlight those skills and have a separate skills section as well. Imagine that you play football. Okay. So you played football you play for a team. You know, it's on the weekend. You play every weekend in a Saturday league and you are the captain. What does that say about you? So I wait for some responses, and then the students start thinking, oh yes, I understand now. So a captain, so this is a hobby, this is an interest, but it's a commitment. That individual will obviously be in a position of leadership simply because they are a captain of a team. So they will demonstrate leadership skills. They are leading a team. Okay. There's certain tactics that they will need to demonstrate, and therefore they have great teamwork skills as well. They're playing football, so it's an environment where you want to win, you want to be successful. You're keeping fit, you're keeping healthy. You've been that captain, you've been playing on the team, say, for 3 years, and you've been captain for 2 years. That's a big commitment. So it demonstrates that you're a committed individual. Can you see all the skills that you can demonstrate on your CV simply because you are the captain of a football team? And that's something that we then start promoting or asking and speaking to our students and think, well, tell me, what did you do at university? What do you do in your spare time? What do you do on the weekend? Have you raised any money for charity? Have you helped a relative? You know, do you have caring responsibility? Um, you know, have you had to look after younger siblings or family as well? These are all things that demonstrate your worth. And those are things to answer your question, are those transferable skills that we need to be promoting and highlighting on the CV. And it's those skills that the employer is looking for.
So, from what you've said now, it means that international students shouldn't take their activities in the university lightly. They should take it seriously because it adds to their experience, which they can promote and talk about during their application process.
Yeah. So that's really, really important simply because when international students arrive here, obviously their main reason for being in the UK is to study. However, many they've got fees to pay, they've got rent to pay, they've got bills to pay. So they need to work. And many of them will be asking me, how do I look for a part-time job? And that's one of the key things, or one of the most important things that our students will certainly ask me. And it's really important then for us to really help and support them to do that as well. So in terms of how they can do that, one of the first thing is that they need to, as you rightly said, they need to step up. They need to ensure that they do some sort of work in the UK when they arrive, simply because UK employers want students and international students to have UK experience. So if you think that you can come to the UK and just do your studies and then, trying to look for a job, that's going to be quite challenging. It's really important for you to demonstrate that, you've actually gone out there, you've looked for a job, you've undertaken maybe some volunteering, that, and those kind of skills that you will develop, those skills are skills that you have developed in the UK, and UK employers want to see that. That's the thing. Secondly, it's very important for our international students to have some sort of work in the UK, because they need to improve their communication skills. They need to improve their English. All right. English is not the first language of our international students. It's sometimes the second, if not the third language. All right. So many of our students speak great English, but some of our students struggle. So by working in the UK and having that communication with the people of UK, they are communicating, they're developing their English, they're developing their skills. It's going to help them when they finish their studies and they start applying for those graduate jobs as well. So that's one of the key things that I tell my students as well. Please do try and find some sort of experience. And like I said, it doesn't have to be paid. It could be unpaid. There are so many organizations that are looking for volunteers. And if you have an opportunity to volunteer, the skills that you develop and English, we all speak English. All our international students can speak English, but they're all at different levels. And what our international students need to do is to improve and increase those levels. And the only way that they're going to do that is by speaking. And many of our international students don't speak, because what they're in is, when they're in the UK, they're with their friends and they speak their own language, their mother tongue. And that's one of the first things that I will say to our students is, you will not forget your mother tongue. You will not forget how to speak your language. What you need to be doing is to promote obviously English. You need to be speaking English. So please try and do that. And that's what hopefully many of our international students do.
So let's come back to your university, the Cardiff Metropolitan. I know we've spoken about this before,
Yep.
right? But I just wanted to say it now. I want you to tell me in your own words, what is Cardiff Metropolitan doing differently okay, compared to other universities for international students?
Okay. So I've been in this role for just over a year. I started this role, I believe it was March 2022. And previous to that, during the pandemic, it was evident that Cardiff Metropolitan was receiving higher numbers of applicants from international students to study, from students from Nigeria, from India, Pakistan, Southern Asia, North Africa. Those seem to be, and obviously Europe as well. So all European students are considered international students as well. So we get many students from France and Spain and Italy as well. And Cardiff Metropolitan University seemed to be ahead of the curve. They could see that the numbers were increasing, and therefore we need to provide a resource for those international students. So I've worked in Cardiff Met's career service for 5 years, and I have supported international students during that time. So there were often queries from our international students, and I couldn't answer them simply because I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the skills, or I would often encounter issues and problems when I just didn't have the answers because there wasn't a dedicated resource. So I would often have to go away. I'd have to do some research, and then I would go back to the student, and then I would give them the answer. And that was the case for all my colleagues as well. So all my colleagues were seeing all students. By having a dedicated resource for the international students, there has now been a stronger relationship between the career service and the students. The students know exactly what to do, where to go, how to do it. We're very fortunate in that Cardiff Met is a relatively smaller university compared to other universities as well. So in total, there's just over 13,000 students at Cardiff Metropolitan University, and just over 3,000 international students currently. So that's a quarter. A quarter of our students are international students. And like I said, Cardiff Met seem to be one step ahead, and they haven't. And this is another thing as well. There's not just one resource, there's two. So within our careers team, there are two individuals. There's myself and my colleague, Steve. And we work exclusively with international students. So it's really, really important for us to provide a dedicated resource. We have had an opportunity to do research. We know that our international students require a different way of working with them. All right. We understand their cultural needs and their requirements as well. We understand the countries that they've come from. Whereas if I wasn't in this role, I wouldn't have. We've had this opportunity to undertake this research. We've been talking to a lot of our students, and we didn't have that opportunity to do that before. So that's that first thing. We have that understanding. We know exactly where they've come from, and we ask those questions. We weren't asking those questions before. When they come here to the UK, we ask further questions as well. So we will ask about, their studies. We'll ask about their past experiences. What are their plans? What are their options? Where do they want to be when they finish? And so again, we weren't asking those questions previously. So we now, as a service, have a better understanding and overview of not only where our students have come from, but where they want to go. And if we know where they want to go, we can then do that research for them. So when we deliver our sessions in their lectures or workshops, or when we have one-to-one meetings with our students, then we've got the research and we've found the resources that they need as well. So we now are a lot more knowledgeable. And the thing is, with international students, as we were talking about earlier, the policy from government changes and can change very, very quickly as well. And that's something that us, and that's myself and my colleague Steve, we are able to, because we are in that space, we will know about those policy changes. We will know about governments. We will know about the change in processes as well. And that's something that we can convey to our students. So I was talking to an international student this morning on a one-to-one meeting. We had an online meeting and we were talking about, plans and what she was hoping to do. And then I started talking about the potential changes in legislation. And I know it's only happened this week with regards to international students from 2024 unable to bring their families to the UK. And they can only, at this moment in time, I know it hasn't been finalised, they can only, if they want to study in the UK, come alone. And I questioned that, and the student didn't know anything about it. So it gives me an opportunity to then educate my international students about things that have an impact on them as well. So I think that's where we can make a big difference. And also, when we speak to our students about CVs, about cover letters, about searching and applying for jobs, about going for interviews, the way that we deliver that is different to how we deliver that content to our home students as well. So having that dedicated resource really does make not just a difference, it makes a massive difference to us and more so to our students. I hope they would say the same thing as well.
They should. They should. I mean, just to put it out there, Cardiff Metropolitan is not sponsoring this podcast, but we just identify that good practice, and I feel like it's something we should put out there
Yeah.
for maybe other partners should emulate. But then, it's to explain to international students, a kind of university that thinks about them and have gone the extra miles to provide not just one dedicated resource, but two dedicated resources that are dedicating their time to stay on top of the news, on top of the policies or regulations coming out, and they can be able to effectively educate their students, which is very, very resourceful. So on top of that, right, um, how can international students ensure that their CV, I mean, we've spoken about the formatting of the CV, how you can tailor your CV, what are the common errors and mistakes that international students make and what they can take out from the CV. We've spoken about the numbers of pages a CV should have. Now, lastly, let's talk about this. How can international students ensure that their CV and cover letter, or let's go to CV first.
Yeah.
How can international students ensure that their CV are error free and professionally presented?
Okay. So when we often see the CVs of our international students, and all students, to be honest, this is not specifically for international students, but all our students as well. We are often the first time that maybe they've had their CV checked, and that's one thing that I would strongly recommend all students, international students, to do, that before they start applying for jobs, please go to your career service and first of all use their resources to kind of gain that knowledge and that wisdom of how to create that perfect CV. And then secondly, when you've got that experience and you've made those changes and you've adapted your CV and you think it's ready, before you send it out, get it checked. Go to the career service, make an appointment. Yet we work right throughout the year. Just because term has now finished, okay, so this is recording at the end of May, so our term has now finished for the academic year. Okay, there's exams and there's, dissertation hand-ins and things like that now. But we will be working here and we'll be available for our international students right throughout the summer. So they can still see us, and we can check that for you as well. So we can cast our eyes over it, and we can give you advice on the format. We can give you advice, obviously, on how to set, the different sections out, because this is something that is very confusing to our students as well. So yes, they'll have the name and the contact details and the profile, but then some of the most important information is on the second page, not the first page. So we will give that advice, and we'll say, look, if I was an employer, I would want to see that information on that first page. Remember, it's that first page that needs to create impact. We will read your CV, okay? And we will see whether it is creating impact. And if it does, we'll tell you. And if it doesn't, we'll tell you as well. And then we will give you the tips and the guidance that you need to ensure that you are creating that impact. All right. Each bullet point should start with a power verb. It's a very powerful word: managed, led, recruited, supervised, coordinated. These are words that are very impactful, that should be used at the beginning of each bullet point. And that is something that many of our students don't do.
Thank you so much for your time, Naeem. It was a
No,
very,
no,
very
no.
great pleasure.
It's been great chatting to you. I really enjoyed it.